Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here tonight with us. Georgia is a small state, relatively small country, but a very important one, as so many others are, as we can see. Why is that so? This will become obvious in a few minutes, but I also think that we have to draw our attention to the very fact that the fragmenting world order we are facing now sees its kind of, has its reflections and its proxy wars, its struggles in small, not only in larger regions or countries, but also in smaller ones. And Georgia is certainly, let's put it that way, a very sad example where we, not only when we sent out this invitation, the situation was very tense and challenging, but it has become even more so. And so I'm very happy, first of all, to welcome Cathrin Kahlweit, who will be moderating this evening, as usual, as an expert on the region, and of course our two guests that directly came from Georgia, Ketevan Shoshiashvili and Guram Imnadze. I hope my pronunciation was more or less correct. Perfect. So thank you very much. It's also very brave, and they're two very brave members of the civil society in Georgia. So that's a great effort. Thank you. Also, I would like to draw your attention that we have a more or less large community of students and young people, living here in Vienna from Georgia. And I'm also very happy. Thank you very much for coming here, for joining us, for taking the opportunity. This is also part of our let's say, mandate, so to speak, of the Brunn-Kreisky Forum to bring people together to have a dialogue on challenging situations, and I hope we can open a space for you here in doing so. So, without further delay, thank you very much for coming. I wish you an interesting talk, evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine Kreuzbrunner, our General Secretary. Thank you very much. So, as Sabine said, just Sunday, I think it was the last big protest. You can see how urgent it is to talk about Georgia, a country that seemed to be on a steady way to democracy and on a way to a close relationship with the EU. And since that rigged election on October 26th, the threats to what is left of Georgian democracy and human rights agenda have quadrupled. And while tens of thousands of people have been demonstrating and protesting, while journalists and opposition politicians and activists have been detained, the world's watching. And I agree, we're very lucky to have two bright young people here. I would consider them professionals. At the same time, they're activists. Sometimes you cannot make a difference between that and Georgia at the moment. Who flew in from Tbilisi yesterday, flying back tomorrow. Guram, for many reasons. One of them is he has a very little baby and he wants to get home. That's the good news. There's good news in Georgia too. And then, you know, you don't want to be away from something like that when it's happening. So I just want to introduce the two of you, and then I will give the floor to them most of the time. So Ketevan Shoshiashvili is a senior corruption researcher at the NGO Transparency International in Georgia. She studied at the Governance and Social Science School of Free University Tbilisi and in Rotterdam and in Amsterdam. As the latest, works as a journalist and at Transparency International. I got to know her virtually because I kept reading her posts on Blue Sky and Twitter. And I was very impressed of the way that she writes and talks about the situation there, and I thought, I want to meet that woman. And Guram Imnadze studied criminal law and joined the Georgian NGO Social Justice Center in 2013, first as a researcher on judicial systems, then as a director of the drug policy research, and now he's the program director of the Judiciary and Democracy program. So we met 1.5 years ago. I looked it up because when I was in Tiflis last time, in the summer of 23, I met him because I was looking for an expert to talk to me about the democracy and the threats against democracy in Georgia. And he was the one to explain everything to me. And I thought, I want to hear more about that since it hasn't gotten better. So Last Sunday, as I said, we saw a peak of violence on the streets when demonstrators tried to block a highway, and when the government had in advance declared illegal that protest and threatened up to 4 years in prison, and 31 people were detained. Katie, you were close up to that. I think you were in the middle of it. What happened? Yes. Can you tell us about the latest events?
Yes, so on Sunday, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, especially people who made it here this evening. I really appreciate it, especially sometimes I consider that Georgia is not always on the mind of internationals, and I really appreciate today. And this is what I'm trying to do on Twitter and Blue Sky to just make sure that information.
Well, it works, as you see.
Yes. We are in the 17th day of non-stop nationwide protests in Georgia. This Sunday, Georgians were kind of inspired by protests in Serbia, and they thought that authoritarian regimes are really uncomfortable with big blockages, and they decided to pick a capital city, Tbilisi's exit spot where our mall also is located to block that. We saw that day, before people even gathered, I think gathering was around at 4, by 2 p.m., Tbilisi Mall area where the exit is located was full of law enforcement agency, basically, with different departments of it. Nearby, you also have Free University campus, which was full also of the special forces. And then you see hundreds, if not thousands, probably hundreds of those officers deployed near the mall, near the campus, and the exit area, which is basically 2-3 minutes driving distance from each other. By 3-4-ish, we already saw that these people, the law enforcement agency officers were pretty tired because Georgians took a lot of time to actually get together. And once they did, there was a conversation, we need to block the road, which Georgian Dream basically already restricted. First, the police was pretty compliant. They said, okay, you are some, but you are not enough to block the entire highway. So what we're going to do is that we're going to walk with you. This is something, and they basically escorted this hundreds of people, basically, up until the mall area, where suddenly I also have a video evidence of that, is that while police was escorting hundreds of protesters, peaceful ones, of course, police started suddenly pushing them on the side, and this just happened in several seconds. The escalation started. Then they started splitting up protesters in different groups.
So was that deliberate? Were they planning? Had they been planning that?
I think so, because I cannot explain what was the point then to first escort the protesters and then split them up and then push them on the side and then escalate the entire situation, start arrests and beating up these protesters.
Before we go on, do you want to explain quickly who we are seeing there? Because Katie asked us to put that picture up, and you probably want to know what faces you're looking at.
Yes, thank you for this. This is from December. We have much more people who were beaten, and they were even by UN already labeled as tortured. What you see here is a Belarus and Russian OMON-style beating of people and torturing them.
The OMON is the secret, the interior police, sorry.
Yes. What we saw in December when the protests were the biggest in scale, while we were not leaving Rustaveli area, the main area in the city center in Tbilisi, is that they started going after activists for no reason. They started going after journalists also for no reason. Evidence of this also exists. And what we see here is that they were first grabbed and arrested and then beaten up in the so-called police vans, where they had perfectly prepared space to beat them up this much. And when I'm talking about OMON style, I'm talking about beating these people up in their face and in their head. This is something that might leave significant risk to their health in the coming years, something that we do not know effects of yet. But what we see here is that there was severe brutality on their own current and their own citizens unleashed from the regime just because people were angry that their country was drifted away from the their European future, something that they have fought for so long. Yeah, basically that's something I wanted to explain.
Guram, there are searches of private property, and journalists are threatened, and there's what's the word for that? Threats against media. Violence is increasing. The government is ruling with decrees. not with laws. There's massive depression. What does the lawyer that you are say to the strictly legal, not to the moral side of what they're doing?
Thank you. First of all, thank you once again for having me here. Thank you, Cathrin. I just add some short remark about this picture.
Please do.
This is not kind of novel tendency. It started in 2023, beating activists or political leaders by police officers. At the beginning, the interesting thing is that at the beginning, when this new practice was implemented in Georgia, victims of this violence tried to hide these incidents in order to not to spread fear that others would be under the same risks. But it started that some media propaganda, governmental propagandist media somehow attained those pictures of victims with their damaged faces, and they spread it. And this is also not kind of accidental that they are beaten in their heads and faces, which is visible. They are directly aiming their faces, which will be it will be impossible for them to hide, and they are sending messages to the rest of the society that they will be under the same risks. And of course, none of these violent acts haven't been investigated, although some of them were conducted in public places where there are lots of eyewitnesses or CCTV cameras. Of course, none of these violent cases have been investigated effectively, and that comes my answer.
Exactly. Let's look at the systemic actually questions. This is what we see, and that's how they work. But what exactly do they do, and what are they aiming for?
Can you repeat?
What are they aiming for? What is their what are they doing by using repression? And are they basically acting lawful? I mean, it's a question of interpretation, obviously, but...
First of all, I don't want to avoid your previous question. Yeah. Of course, from the legal perspective, from the lawyer's perspective, it's almost impossible for me to speak about legal guarantees, rule of law, because government's actions and their announcements about legislative changes clearly shows that they are giving up this kind of ambition that Georgia is rule of law based country, and rule of law principle is active principle in our life. None of the Georgian citizens now have the belief that if they will act lawfully, they will not be charged with criminal or administrative charges. None of us believe this kind of. None of us has this kind of belief, and maybe this is the strategy of Georgian Dream government, that they are trying to build in each of us that we do not have any legal guarantees. Any of our protests, however lawful it should be, will be somehow any of our protests will be responded by the government with some kind of charges. Maybe it is administrative, but when I'm speaking about administrative charges, it is quite extensive also. Fines, for example, administrative fines is even causing even bigger discomfort than detention quite often for Georgian citizens. Another aspect is that once again fear of physical well-being, because not only police uses violence against citizens, against protestants, but there are some so-called private violent groups. We call them titushkas. It is not also a Georgian know-how. They're
all over Eastern Europe.
They outsource it from the Eastern Europe. Yes. When particular well-organized groups are using violence against political activists, media representatives, and also these incidents aren't investigated. So they are building society which is driven with fear and distrust towards anybody.
So the fear question, that's how it's supposed to work. Does it work?
No.
Okay, why does it not work?
Because people are in the streets protesting regardless what they do.
So the numbers are not going down?
They are.
They are going down?
Yeah, but they still exist, and they are still blocking streets in Georgia.
So when we see, it's always difficult to judge. We see the pictures on television or on photos, and you cannot judge, is it 100, is it 1,000, is it 10,000, is it only in Tbilisi?
It's much less, I can confirm that, yes.
Okay. What does that tell you? Is it going to go away?
Of course, this kind of severe draconian laws, basically, that's how I call it, being arrested for nothing, but for them for everything, being charged under criminal charges for false violations, everything that they need to impose on you to instill fear and make sure that you do not step out of your house, they are doing. They are not just only instilling that fear, but they are going into your apartment and raiding that. This is something that we even saw before elections. We should not forget that all of this escalation that we see from Georgian Dream is not super new. It has been here and there happening in Georgia, and to be very honest, our parents' generation has seen it a lot. So this is not very new. It's just Georgian Dream made a very clear choice several years ago that they were not for democracy anymore, and what we see is that it's a culmination basically of that choice of going for Russia-style governance, Russian-style economy, Russian-style wealth management in the country, and this is what exactly we are witnessing in the country. And going back to your question, these fines and these measures to instill fear probably works to some extent, but as we have discussed today and mentioned to you, there are people in Georgia who, regardless of what fines and restrictions you're going to impose to them, they are going to fight, and they are ready to sacrifice their lives and their well-being for their country, because this is the moment. I want everyone in this room to go back home with the knowledge that for Georgia, this is existential. If this fight is not won by the people of Georgia and is won by Russian interests, this country will turn into, you can call it whether Belarusia or something like that, but this country will lose part of sovereignty. It's going to lose what you knew Georgia was, and it's going to become Russian-style governance country that exists in the very beautiful Caucasus region.
Before we go back a bit, Guram wanted to say something?
I just wanted, the protest is not, I wouldn't say when the protest is weakening. Of course, it always has the kind of waves when many individuals are in the streets of Tbilisi, but when more or less there are nothing happening in a political landscape, of course, less people are in the streets, but I suppose that spring will be politically more active. Winter time, New Year's period is less active, and spring will be more active. Georgian Dream announced terrible legislative amendments, and I'm waiting that Rustaveli Avenue will be busier than we've seen previously.
Please, I have one quick note addition on this. So we are often referring to numbers and maybe not necessarily the content of the idea of the protests. Numbers are great, and I'm pretty sure, again, I agree. Every day doing the same thing unless something changes kind of becomes, it's every day's like each other, and sometimes people decide to go for one day's sleep instead of being at the protest. So this is kind of natural, I think, after standing on the streets for 2 months. But again, stronger these restrictions go, people get more angry. That's something that we also need to remember. And another thing is that political activities also determine, geopolitics also are affecting this entire situation. What kind of support do we get? It also helps people in Georgia understand that they're not alone. This is really important for the people. I remember being on Rustaveli and reading on the parliament building, which was lasered sometimes because we didn't have internet. It was so crowded in Rustaveli that, some ambassador left their post. This ambassador from this European Union member country said this about Georgia. This means a lot. And again, Georgian people, regardless whether or not they are 1,000 more or 1,000 less, are still willing to fight. This is what is the key here.
You're working for Transparency International, you're working for a social justice org. Both of you checked or worked on and reported on the elections. Can the two of you, this is a question to both of you, tell me why you are so sure that they were rigged and how can you prove it? I mean, I don't doubt it, but I want to understand.
Do you want to go for first?
Okay. Yes. First, I have to start that there was not elections in Georgia which were not manipulated by the ruling party previously,
so this is new.
And somehow it's kind of it is kind of normalized when governmental parties are manipulating administrative resources or other types of instruments. Finances, for example, for electoral purposes, but this election was unprecedented in that regard. Georgian Dream used any aspect of the elections, informational infrastructure, election administration, and it was unprecedented politicized electorate administration, central electoral administration, which avoided, even we have thousands of evidences about how elections were rigged. They actively try to avoid observer organizations and particular observers in precincts to document, to gain evidences, but still we managed to gain thousands of these manipulations. And manipulations and election violations are, for example, using different individuals' personal identities, identity documentations.
So faking votes, actually.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, bribing citizens, especially in the rural areas and regions where less public control and scrutiny. Using criminal criminal groups, and they used, for example, criminal justice system quite actively in that regard. For example, they had massive amnesty act. Parliament adopted massive amnesty act
for
weeks earlier election. And lots of prisoners left prisons, but it was of course used in order to have argument with criminal groups or criminal organizations to use even for example Kitushkas were used in that correlation in order to use physical violence more actively and effectively in the streets. And several days ago, President also pardoned more than 600 individuals from prisons. We still don't know who they are, what their backgrounds, what charges they had, and also this is another evidence how this sector also used for electoral purposes. And I'm not saying ordinary, normalized tools such as propaganda, disinformation, which was also crucial tools for this election.
Katie, one question I want to add to that. I keep hearing that 80% of the Georgians are pro-EU. And there's lots of skepticism against Georgian Dream. And even, I think it was Ivanishvili who said before the elections, well, we know that people are kind of discontent and it will be difficult this time. Why did they need to rig the elections to that extent? Were they probably, were there more people critical than they expected or less? I mean, it's difficult to tell who is on what side in this country.
It's a very complex question, and I'm going to try to dismantle it in a couple of different things. Georgia, we have to imagine, not imagine, but understand that Georgia is not ruled by a government, normal government. Georgia is ruled by an oligarch who has basically around half of Georgian budget. The amount of money that he has is almost half of Georgian budget. And the amount of money he has is almost 30% of Georgian GDP, 25 around 30%. This is how much money he has, and this is how much influence he has been instigating over Georgian government institutions since the time he stepped in the government, and quite before too.
That was 2012?
12, yes. Yeah. That's one. We have been talking about state capture in Georgia from 2018. We saw that as soon as Ivanishvili came, his party came into power.
He's he's the founder of Georgian Dream and wanted to be prime minister and stepped down, and he has his puppets working for him.
Yes, so he brought a big coalition against the previous government in 2012, promised all the democratic reforms and justice and etc. to Georgian people. Also, he promised free money, which Georgians should have probably understood that doesn't exist, but that's a different story. But he came and everyone knew that he was very friendly with Russia. Everyone knew that he was a Russian-made oligarch who had certain connections with certain people in Russia, and he was billionaire, and Georgian people thought that he had a good intention. But what we saw very soon after coming with the promise of democracy is that he very slowly started dismantling his coalition partners. People slowly in his own party realized that he was not the person they wanted to work with. And soon after they started their second term, we started seeing that his top government officials were coming, you know, from where? From his companies that he has been establishing in Georgia for a very long time. Bidzina Ivanishvili treats Georgia, the country, as one of his companies. And this is how he's appointing and dismissing high-level officials. I'll be very quick.
I just want to make a joke, sorry.
Okay,
I wanted to say it sounds like Trump, not like Putin, but maybe there's connections between those.
Would you appoint your dentist as a health minister? Because that's what he did. He had a personal bodyguard that is currently our Minister of Internal Affairs, and he orders all these beatings, actually. I mean, he doesn't order, Bidzina orders, but he makes sure that this happens. He has at least 5 government officials, like ministers, coming from his Kartu Bank, which he established in Georgia as he came to Georgia slowly, not necessarily in 2012, but earlier. So again, he established a net of kleptocrats, that's how I call it, people with significant influence and mostly money too. One of the great examples is Mayor of Tbilisi, who has been on the post for a very long time, and he has been enjoying all the development projects that Tbilisi has been suffering from, partially, at least many experts would say so. So he installed all these loyalists, all these kleptocrats in his government, and then they internally started building their own networks in the municipalities and local governments, who then would make sure that they would have influence over the people. And what is happening in the people? We have people that are very vulnerable financially. We have vast difference between the elites who have a lot of power and money through corruption mostly, and then we have people who have hardly any money to survive. And how do you make sure that you subdue these people? You make sure that they rely on you. And how are you going to use that when you want your elections won? You make sure that they rely on you and they give your vote or help you get a vote for you. This is a short story of 2024 elections.
But now I'm even more confused, to be honest, because everything that you said now sounds like people would have voted for him anyways. But I keep reading that 60% in reality voted against Georgian Dream. So what are the findings?
No, about your question is about elections. How many people in reality voted for Georgian Dream?
Can you assess that, or is that just a good guess, or don't we really know?
No.
But I have to come back. Okay, yeah. I'll let you first.
There's hand, I'm seeing, but I'll try to respond to your question.
Just for comparison, our local election in Vienna, there were officially about 1,700 people, Georgian citizens here. About 1,800 gave the vote.
I see.
And for Georgian Dream, there were only 80 people.
Okay.
Like not even 10%.
Okay.
And 90%
okay.
people living in Austria. Okay. You
okay.
understand? We're living in
I get that.
It's safe here. But this is some measurement. Even with this administrative force, you cannot not only double, make it 5 times more.
Okay.
More than half.
Okay. I would like to discuss that later. You can ask us, and then I would like to, open up the state later. I'm trying to explain to people who are not from Georgia how things work. Sometimes it's not as easy, and sometimes we need to understand. Wait, just a second. So you, and then you could. Yeah.
I'm also from Georgia, and I live here in Vienna, and mostly every countries and every city Georgian Dream lost and opposition won.
Okay.
But Georgian Dream said about immigrants who create GDP and country's economy that we don't care about foreigners.
Okay, we don't care about foreigners. They call their own citizens foreigners. Okay, so just shortly, and then I have to ask again. Okay, Kitty.
Oh, can I?
Yes, run.
I mean, your question that you came back with what I was trying to say, well, immigrants is one part that they absolutely ignored and didn't even open polling stations for them. And I'm pretty sure the picture will be very different. But mass intimidation is the major problem why people were scared to vote for opposition instead of Georgian Dream. So that doesn't land me with the logic that they would anyway vote for Georgian Dream.
It's a very Western question, I admit.
And the second part is that these people were not just intimidated to make sure that they would vote for Georgian Dream, but partially they were involved in ID collection, something that Georgian Dream later used at the polling station to get double votes or more votes.
I see.
So it's again, it's a very big picture and small puzzle pieces that we're talking about.
I want to add again, I'm not doubting that. I know that even the European Union and OSCE and everybody said it's doubtful. But anyways,
yeah, I just wanted to add, of course, this parameter about foreign country votes is really interesting. It might be not perfect criteria to assess. Another criteria what we can look at is that public opinion surveys conducted well-respected organizations in Georgia in pre-election period. What was the personal attitudes towards political parties, and around 25–30% of Georgian citizens were voting for Georgian Dream. These public opinion surveys were showing constantly. And lastly, on the elections, actually Georgian Dream lost elections on every major city of Georgia.
Okay.
Because there was more observers. There were more observers, and it was and citizens in Georgia in those areas were less affected with Georgian propaganda or fears or bribes. Okay. They were more kind of medigi, strict about this. About European values and support within society, how can we explain Georgian Dream's open anti-Western shift? First of all, I'm still skeptical about this 80%, about how strong it is. Of course, it is correct response, not correct result of surveys, and 80% of Georgians think that they want European integration. But how strong this support should be further critically assessed. Another thing is that Georgian Dream also doesn't have any clear ideology. They are not clearly claiming that they are anti-Western or anti-European Union political power. They are not claiming this. They are always trying to keep this blunt ideology or not quite clear frames, ideological frames. Till 2022, they were member of the European Socialist Party. They were declaring themselves as more or less leftists or socialist party, but they just in a couple of seconds they just left this party because they have feared that European Socialist Party would eliminate them from their ranks because of their clearly undemocratic attitudes. Same applies to the European pro-European narratives. They declaring them even for these elections. Yes. Their political, their pre-election posters, they were showing European Union's flags. But they were claiming that we are going towards EU with dignity and with honor. That's why it's and for the electorate, maybe majority of their electorate also believed that Georgian Dream is bringing country towards EU. It was after elections when leader or one of the leaders of the Georgian Dream announced that they are not shifting the geopolitical course, but they are just stopping this process for a couple of years.
Yeah. You said that the elections have, in one way or other, always been rigged. Was that true after the Rose Revolution, under the first or second Saakashvili elections as well? I mean, he was a so-called Westerner. He was educated in the States. Did he need that, or was Georgia more democratic then?
I would say elections in Georgia were problematic to some extent all the time. I cannot really tell you the degree of, to what degree that elections was better or worse than this. But again, people in Georgian institutions such as elections and the judiciary have always been problematic, and they've always been leaning towards whatever the establishment wanted. And there were some reforms here and there in both, but we see right now that none of these institutions managed to sustain any of those.
Okay.
Of course, there was always problems, and Saakashvili had not held perfect elections, never. In 2012, elections were terrible elections, I would say so, with lots of intimidation, fear in the society, but still, Saakashvili gave up political power based on the election results.
He stepped up.
He stepped up.
The reason why I'm harping on that for a while is because I'm trying to understand. There's lots of all of Eastern Europe has been in a transformation process. We watched that from the West with fascination. In one country, it didn't. In some countries, it didn't really work at all. In others, like with Maidan, there was kind of a second shock transformation. Let me put it that way. And I keep reading that Georgia is one of the only countries which started out as a former Soviet Union republic, then transformed into a functioning democracy, and is now like moving back into the Russian sphere, becoming kind of a outpost of the Russian imperium again. Is that a precise description of what's happening?
That is at risk for sure. But I think the trend that you're describing is going back much beyond Georgia, and I think it's on the European continent and beyond. It's a global struggle. I would say the version of the problem you described is a bit maybe not outdated, but it got an upgrade, and right now we're facing an era where we are autocracies versus democracies, and you see the same struggle in many countries outside of Caucasus region, in the Eastern European region, and much beyond. I would say alt-right tendencies have been winning in Europe. I really wanted to bring up Mr. Orban, that has been one of the biggest friends of Georgian Dream. Georgian Dream has been saying that they're going to Europe with dignity, but what they have really been doing is splitting the society in Georgia and telling them that there is good Europe and there is perverted Europe. The perverted Europe wants you to become, homosexual. They want you to change this and that. They want you to lose your Georgianity. And the good Europe actually is what Orban represents, that we defend our Georgianity and that we go for our conservative values, something like that. This is something that they have been building for at least good 2 years, that we see that they are distancing themselves from the European Union people knew and people know, and creating a new European Union, which Orban itself is promoting in his own country. This is why we see significant parallels between Orban's not only governance in his own country and corruption, but also even election methods. The war campaign, that anti-war campaign, war banners that we called, the Georgian Dream had to instill fear of war in Georgian voters and make sure that the Georgian voters see Georgian Dream as a peace party, are the exact same copy-paste of the Orban's, Orban's election campaign. So what you see here is that Georgia is not yet the European Union member, but the European members inside the Union are coupling with authoritarian regimes, and they are trying to take the exact same practices to make sure that your democracy is being threatened around the world.
Another very Western question, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to understand. Everything that we've been talking about so far is very fresh, and the wounds are very fresh. And the development, you keep mentioning 2018, because the shift of Ivanishvili has become more obvious in the last years. But I wonder, as a political scientist, two things happened in 2008 that were probably vital for the development of Georgia. That is the denial of the NATO membership action plan, and the other one is the war. There's two traumas. I mean, the one is political, the other is real. Would you say that they still work today and have influence?
of course, they work, and Georgian Dream tries to work to activate both those tramways the best possible ways for them, for their political sake. Firstly, this political tramway about NATO's refusal. They are building this kind of narrative that we never achieve on this path. We never become members of the NATO, even members of the maybe sometimes the European Union, and that's why we don't have to build our policies and geopolitical trajectory on that beat. We don't have to
because we're going to be refused or disappointed again, or what's the story?
It will never bring guaranteed results. It will not be. We don't have any guarantees on that field. In other areas, of course, war, 2008's war. And those war is also used for couple of narratives. First of all, it was Saakashvili's decision that previous government started this war. Secondly,
that's a narrative that works in the West as well too.
Yes, it works. Then they build up on this narrative that not only Saakashvili, but Saakashvili was manipulated and played with global West in order to get involved in this war. And third, of course, now we are under the same threats. If we lose the elections, if we gave up the power, then Saakashvili and collective national movement will take into power.
Yes, I get that. There's the threat that war will come again. And as you said, as you mentioned, it's the copy and paste of Orban saying we will be dragged into that Ukraine war. But on the other hand, I mean, every Georgian I ever talked to was extremely traumatized by that war. And I would have assumed that this grows such an anti-Russian sentiment that you would never trust those people again.
I didn't realize that we left impression that anyone in Georgia has any trust for Russians.
Distrust.
I thought.
There's obviously big mistrust, but at the same time, they're working to closer ties with Russia. That's what doesn't make sense to me. So you see what I mean?
But Georgian Dream wasn't really positioning as very pro-Russian, although I mentioned that in the beginning.
Yes, you said that. So they're kind of like, there's a double game.
Yes, for a very long time they masked themselves as very pro-European. They were the ones who put in in our constitution that everyone in the government has to do their best to make sure that we are integrated in the EU and NATO. So that was their amendment. That's what they did it themselves, and they were therefore associated with big success stories with the EU, such as visa-free regime, association agreement, etc. Something that many governments and people actually in the public sector have worked really hard to achieve. But again, there is a trauma of war, but what choice or what situation right now in Georgians, and not only Georgians, we haven't mentioned Moldovans, for example.
Yes, I was going to come to that.
The only choice that Russia gives you is that you either become their slave and become their vassal country and territory, I don't know, whatever they prefer to use your territory for, or you continue fighting for your freedom. And that's what the current fight in Georgia is, that Georgia remains Georgia and doesn't become Georgia. That's what the fight is about.
Yeah. So,
You point out a really interesting issue that, of course, 2008 war increased mistrust, fear, anything negative towards Russia. Of course, but if you look at Georgian Dreams, they are not mentioning Russia at all. They never mention, when we are speaking about Ukraine, they are speaking at maybe it was Zelensky's mistakes or Zelensky's decision. They based on our experience, they are more frequently they are mentioning previous government, Saakashvili, not Russia.
So they're not traveling to Moscow like others.
2008 wars. Saakashvili started it, or Saakashvili lost Georgia's territories, not Russia grabbed it. And of course, these kind of narratives are also getting increased, especially from more or less so-called leftist groups in Georgia. I consider myself as leftist, but there are some other pro-governmental leftists, intellectual leftists, which are claiming that global developments also, that NATO is getting nearer towards Russia, and NATO's expansion left no other option to Russia to just use to donate war, and then Ukraine's.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, that also kind of shifts responsibility from Russia towards other actors.
Exactly. Okay, that makes sense. We have about 15 more minutes, so I would quickly stay on that, and then go on to a few other questions. You mentioned Moldova. The difference, though, is, as I learned now, I wasn't really aware of that. That they're like playing with that pro-European sentiment and undermining it at the same time. That's what that's what you're making clear. In Moldova, this was not the case at all. I mean, I've been there like 3 times last year, and they were like so pro-Russian and so, the opposition in that case, and the disinformation was so obviously Russian style. That there's no comparison. So, but you were mentioning Moldova. In what respect?
Yes, because I remember specifically when we had elections, Moldova also had elections, and I watched how after our very unfortunate developments in Tbilisi, then I saw how Moldovans also fought, and they had the first round, and then we were all checking the website when we were supposed to get the results from the second round, and we saw that immigrants actually saved Moldova, something that Georgia was not even given a chance of. And all these immigrants who had to flee the country or study, or I don't know, many reasons, because economic reasons, they have felt voiceless, because this government doesn't care about them, because obviously one of the key reasons why these people left the country is because of their policies and the environment they created there. So Moldova is a good reason to actually compare, because Russia kind of imposed a similar hybrid approach to Georgia and Moldova. He has a certain military presence, I mean the occupation, and then Russia also imposed quite some disinformation campaigns in Georgia and Moldova.
The difference is probably that the government fought against it and not the opposition, obviously.
This is why it's so important to underline that Georgian state institutions are captured. It's under one man's rule. And this is why Georgians, as citizens of Georgians, could not really register what they really wanted for their country this year.
Okay. I want to know, we talked about Ivanishvili a bit, not very much. I mean, he has ties in Russia. He made his billions in Russia, obviously. When you look at Russia, there's been a big emigration wave to Georgia. Half of it were people fleeing from Putin, and then there's people who deserted because they didn't want to fight in the army. It's partially hard to say what side they're on. So what influence does the Russian emigration have on the Georgian society?
I will say very quickly, and then I'm going to pass it to you. I think the first thing that they bring is tension, a lot of tension on the streets, that they have, I think this is very personal, but they have zero awareness of us, our traumas, and how we perceive them, even breathing the same air.
Even the anti-Putin immigrants, like
I
you
have
see pro-Ukrainian flags everywhere.
It might be my personal story why I haven't, but I have not seen many of them. But I'll pass it with.
For example, I haven't personally met, but I know some Russians which were actively participating in these protests in Tbilisi, and now they are arrested. Because of
they're arrested by
Georgian Dream government, anti-governmental protest, and many of the thing is that some of the activists, human rights activists, are in Georgia, and they are on our contact with us and sharing their experiences. We've documented dozens of cases when Russian dissidents were not allowed in Georgia to arrive. They were banned on the administrative borders, although all this migration was without any controls, but there are some rumors that there were blacklists provided by the Russian agencies towards Georgian counterparts of dissidents which should not be received by our side. This is what can I say. These tendencies also have, of course, a strong economic impact. It's based on the one hand, we had significant economic growth on numbers, but this economic growth was not resulted on economic well-being of the people. Quite contrary, prices are skyrocketed in Georgia. I would say that Tbilisi is one of the most expensive city right now to live than most of the European cities. products and rent and etc.
Yeah.
It's quite expensive in Tbilisi, and this is the economic impact which we are experiencing. I wouldn't say that it has a strong political impact, but there are some fears that throughout this migration, some people also entered in Georgia, which could be used for I don't know, for sabotages if needed or etc. But we have not received, we have not recorded this kind of case.
You wanted to say something?
So just a quick addition that Russians came in like in hundreds of thousands, and quite some of them decided to stay. Quite some of them started companies. I was checking today, and I think in 2023 they started 26,000 companies.
Yes,
in Georgia, and
exactly,
by 2023, I think the remittances and tourism and everything that our economy got from Russians was 3 billion. This is significant. I think that this is a lot. And they, with this was a wave that I think Georgian economy saw quite some. It's a part of the puzzle of Georgia's dependence of Russia, on Russian economy, and all the remittances, money that Russians have moved from Russia to Georgia and starts their new life here and establish companies and actually settle in Georgia. That is something that they have been very comfortable doing from 2022 up until 2024. We've seen that quite some of them stayed in Georgia and they're creating their communities and continuing their life while some others left. So again, the impact of this is that it has contributed significantly to Georgia's growing dependence on Russian economy.
Okay. I'm learning a lot tonight, for example, that the Russian playbook that's generally quoted when it comes to autocracies in the East being revived does not fully apply because it's much more complicated, obviously. There's many more interests and the Ivanishvili economic interests and the Georgian Dream kind of playing its own game. But part of the Russian playbook, I want to use that just for now, is the foreign agents law. It has been fought a lot. It has been introduced, taken back, reintroduced. Is that something that is used to pressure you guys, for example, a lot? I mean, is that part of a vivid threat?
Yes, it is, of course. Actually, it was the first big evidence that Georgian Dream was shifting its geopolitical course, trajectory. This law, for example, our organizations, both of our organizations hasn't been registered in this foreign agents list. But of course, it beyond the legal outcomes, it has social results, and we are already framed by the Georgian Dream as in ones who are acting as foreign based on foreign interests.
Do you have to put it on your website and everything? Like,
not yet.
Like
the law doesn't require this kind of activities. The only main requirement is a declaration and providing all the private personal information data we have. But for example, all the observer organizations are already framed that they are not local Georgian organizations. They are acting based on the foreign interest, and that's why if
so you're not good Georgians.
Yes, and if they are claiming that elections were rigged, it's not the claim of the Georgian people, it's somehow outsiders' voices, and with this way they are trying to delegitimize us. And by the way, today one of the leaders of the ruling party announced that they will make amendments in this foreign agents law, as like similarly as like there is in FARA, American FARA. I'm sure that it will not be same as American FARA, but the final result will be that if organization avoids registration with this into this registry, the legal consequences will be criminal charges, and they will.
You wanted to add something?
Yes. I just have to zoom out a bit before I answer your question. Even though Georgian Dream has already got started with their authoritarian steps before 2022. In 2022, the world order has changed. Countries have made up their mind whether or not they were standing for freedom or they were standing for tyranny. and eventually very clearly made the choice to couple with Russia. And that comes with a certain basket. And in this basket, you have a couple of steps, and those can be very dramatic and or very spread out in the years. But what Georgian Dream chose, along with, I just really have to mention that Mikheil Kavelashvili in 2022 already had some disputes over his billions in the Western banks, which is another story, but it's important. This is where Global War Party conspiracy theory is coming from, because Mikheil Kavelashvili only sees this country as his company, and he's going to do everything to defend his funds. And his funds were at risk in one of the investment banks. There was a case, and he linked the European Union with that since the EU Commission called for sanctioning him, and that created problems for him. But from 2022, we saw that basket kind of started accelerating all the components that you need to slowly integrate the country into authoritarianism. Foreign agents law is a really important part of it, but we have two developments in that. In 2023, they tested the grounds. They were shifting from so-called still masked as per European government trying hard to apply for EU membership candidacy status, which they did, as the Ukraine also did. And they were still playing this double game, while in 2023, they first tested this. People resisted, they backed down, they thought about it, and they prepared a grand plan that they are trying to execute right now to not even listen to a single citizen's voice, and that's what they did in 2024. I think they also assessed very well that they would not be able to win in 2024 parliamentary elections. That's why they mobilized all the necessary tools they needed to make sure that they would stay in power. And foreign agents law is a really important aspect of it, because what they did in the mid-election year, so in October we had elections, by summer, after protests in spring, by early summer, they adopted it. And what they did is that they shifted attention and focus for a while of the organizations that were supposed to observe away from that focus. And they first did that, and what they after that did is that they put organizations into scrutiny, whether or not they would be registered, fined. They gave them some other things to really think about and consider, while all these organizations should have been doing mobilization for these elections. What they also did, and it's regarding my organization, is that they used the so-called Anti-Corruption Bureau to declare us as political. Basically, they compared us and equaled us to the political party, just to make sure that potentially their intention was to remove us from the election observation. And just a quick note that TI has one of the biggest election observation mission, so they did not want the truth to be told. That was their reasoning behind this, and this is something that they failed in, and we fought, and we were back to. They had to drop this groundless accusations to us, and we continued to prepare for elections. And what we did is that we deployed 2,000 to 3,000 election observers, something that none of the organizations in Georgia managed to do. And we put a light to the world what Georgian Dream did, and that was something that became very public on the day of the election.
Thank you for zooming out. One last question, which is a rather general one. In 2016, Georgia agreed on an association agreement with the European Union. 2023, the candidate status was granted. In summer 2024, the European Council halted the accession process. And in fall 2024, Georgia suspended the EU membership discussions until 28, saying it's not over, we're just like taking a little break. So, what do Garibashvili and Ivashvili want? Is the European story over, do you think? This is two questions. One is probably yes, but the real question is it over?
You really worked hard for this question, right? It's because it's so deep.
Well, actually, I want to know. Well, you could say, well, I'm optimistic, but that'd be a bit simple.
So I want to go a bit emotional about this, but all the Georgians who are sitting here and who were at home on 2019, on June 20th, when we saw a Russian MP in Georgian parliament, that day was, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This is what describes what Georgians are fighting for. Russians will not.
You are allowed to be emotional. That's good.
Russians will not prosper in Georgia. Russians will not win in Georgia, regardless how this goes, regardless how the coming month will go. This is something that you cannot explain. Maybe we will try to explain, but this is why I specifically brought up this date, because every Georgian knows what they felt seeing actual Kremlin representative in the Georgian institution. That is the nightmare, absolute nightmare, that Georgian nightmare actually brought to Georgia, and what they're doing is that they are embodying that right now. So I think for Georgian Dream, the EU, and I cannot imagine them going back to the European path, but I cannot imagine Georgian people not going back to that path. Okay,
go on.
Last short words. Yes, what Ivanishvili and his puppets want is just power and money. It's clear. They don't have any geopolitical aspirations. It's simple, quite. About the second part of the question, it depends on many things. It depends on how how protests in Georgia will proceed, of course, but it also depends on Europe. And I also wanted to speak about this quite shortly. The threats, the risks we are facing, it's not unique for Georgia. Politics Georgian Dream is playing is not Georgian Dream's know-how when there are no clear values, aspirations, etc. It's kind of real politics when only powers are playing game, and it's about building closed society. And these threats are not unique for Georgia only, it's also about Europe, and that's why I guess Georgia's case and Georgia's development should be interesting and into political focus in any European country, because these threats are same in anywhere right now in the world. And if Georgian Dream will succeed in that field, closing Georgia's society. Now I can say that Georgian society is open. We have open society right now with all of its colors, dark and white and bright colors. But what we clearly see is that Georgian Dream is trying to build closed society. And of course, it will not end up only with Georgia. If this kind of same politics might be successful anywhere in Europe, and that's why if Europe also will become more become less value based and with closed societies, of course, then Georgia's European aspirations, of course, will be more illusionary. And
okay, yeah. Thank you.